Alright all, and welcome to a very special 2024 World Endurance Championship preview. And joining me for this one is someone you probably all know. You might not recognise the face, but you will know the name. It is Tim from Only Endurance. So Tim, if you'd like to introduce yourself briefly for everyone.
Yeah, will do. Ewan, thank you very much for introducing me with very special for you words before. That's a rarity to be introduced like that, so I'll take it. But yeah, I'm Tim. I run the page Only Endurance. You might see the page on Instagram and Twitter, kind of an independent outlet covering endurance racing, particularly the World Endurance Championship and IMSA. And one-man band, but looking forward to getting out there a bit more this year and doing things like this, talking to, other creators, doing things, podcasts, whatever it might be. So thank you very much for having me on the show, Ewan.
Thank you very much for joining me. So let's get cracking right into it then. And I suppose the biggest news heading into the 2024 season, the first one, the increased hypercar grid. We'll get onto some of that in a little bit, but also a change of the class structure, moved to just two classes with just hypercar and the new LMGT3 class, LMP2 and LMGT no more. So I suppose thing to start is really why we have gone to this. Is that the
Yeah, I think the real key point there is the strength of hypercar. There's kind of 2 points to combine there. Your point about the expanding top class grid, 19 cars now in the top category, which it seems like a lifetime ago that we had 5 cars showing up for the opening round at Spa 3 cars at Spa 2021, and then Glickenhaus and Peugeot then getting involved the following year. And it's incredible to see the rate in which the category's grown. But with that, there's only a limited amount of space on the grid. This is something that has been spoken about at length, about this kind of 37 car cap. And it's a lot of people are like, there's 60 cars here and so many cars race at Daytona and things like that. How comes WEC can't do that every round? It's kind of a limitation on the actual amount of space at racetracks. I think, is it Fuji, Ewan, that maybe is the limit? I think there's something like the Fuji or circuit. There's one specifically that is the limiting factor. And with that limit in spaces, you kind of have to weigh up whether dropping the LMP2 class for an increased hypercar class field would be worth it. And I'm going to say I personally back the decision. We'll see LMP2 still at Le Mans, but it's kind of made way for this increased car count in the top class. Alpine coming back, Lamborghini, BMW introducing their car over in WEC. A willing sacrifice, I think, in the World Championship to see that boom in the top category.
I have to agree there, and I also have to say, if one class had to go, LMP2 is the one, just to keep that mix of prototypes and GTs. And LMGT3 replacing LMGTE, quite a simple reason for that. With all the factories moving to hypercar, it was the factory-backed racing which was really leading GTE. So LMGT3 slightly different to GT3, but we don't need to get into the details of that particularly. And it just means everything's slightly cheaper, much more variety, and 9 GT manufacturers on the grid, which is much more than the 4 we've been having in the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, and as well, I think it's good to see that there's a number of rules carrying over from GTM. It's a relatively consistent rule set, albeit with a change in the regulations for the actual cars themselves. So the mandate to have a bronze driver in every car should hopefully create kind of a similar racing product to what we've enjoyed in GTM last year and all the previous 10 years of WEC. And now looking at this new era, new cars as well, McLaren joining the grid, Lamborghini, really looking forward to seeing that. And look, you and I, we've watched thousands of hours of GT3 racing, right? We know it always provides good action. I think seeing it on the World Championship stage is definitely something I'm looking forward to this year.
Absolutely. And another thing which is changing for this season is we have a new qualifying format for everywhere outside of Le Mans. Part of, again, the excitement of the hypercars and the bronze drivers, very entertaining on the low fuel, max pace, bigger grid classes. The old 15-minute format per class, that has been benched, and we will now have hyperpole at every single race with 12-minute qualifying for everyone, followed by a 10-minute top 10 hyperpole shootout, which I'm really looking forward to seeing. And I think just more of the cars at full chat is going to be very entertaining indeed.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's going to be an interesting, thing. I'm going to be honest. I quite liked the speciality of the hyperpole format at Le Mans, and I liked that kind of uniqueness about it. And it's going to be interesting to see this knockout style, format introduced at these other races. There's part of me that thinks actually the simplicity of a 15-minute session, go out and set your best time. We had other formats previously in WEC where you had, drivers, 2-driver averages, things like that, which are a lot harder to follow from home and from at the track. And a 15-minute all or nothing session actually really simplified that. I like this idea again. And like you said, they're getting kind of more time of cars flat out, and also having that shootout feel for pole position will be fun. But there is a part of me that really enjoyed that being unique to Le Mans, and I can see why it works at the other WEC races. But I did kind of enjoy it just being something for the 24 hours, and also the fact that it's called hyperpole at every race. I don't know, I do like it, but I also think it's kind of just Q2, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it does take away a little bit of the Le Mans special. My solution to that, bring back the old 6-hour Le Mans into the night qualifying.
Send them out. Just set laps whenever.
11 o'clock at night, Stefan Sarazan booting up his Peugeot to go and stick
and then
on
also
pole.
them suddenly having the printed newspaper front page at midnight in Le Mans with the pole position drivers already on it. So yeah, different times. But yeah, look, I think the simplicity of the 15-minute session was great, and I do think this will add that kind of jeopardy to it. You could get it where a car that's looked really quick in free practice maybe doesn't get the lap in qualifying, and it adds that whole element to it. So part of me should probably just shut up and wait and see what it's like, when we first get it at Qatar and then Imola, and then maybe have an opinion. But yeah, I did kind of like the uniqueness of the Le Mans format.
And I think especially with the sessions so short, it's going to be a real challenge, because 10 minutes, couple of laps to warm up your tyres, you're only going to have 1 or 2 shots at pole. So we've already seen in the prologue how big track limits are a deal are. And let's be honest, it's motorsport in 2024. Track limits are going to be an issue everywhere. So it is real pressure on the drivers. And
yeah, I think it is. And I also I think it's going to be interesting to watch how it plays out, because we've seen it in IMSA as well. We've seen it in WC where a lot of teams go out and they kind of set their time and then are quite happy to just leave it at that. Sometimes we don't get that maybe second or third run that you might be used to in Formula One or other motorsports. So I wonder if there will be people really all or nothing on one lap to try and get through to hyperpole, and then maybe even there want to save tires and not go for 2 runs in qualifying for what is ultimately, so this weekend, a 10-hour race, 1,812 kilometers. It's quite an interesting little playoff, I think, that teams are going to have to play. So part of me does wonder what the actual spectacle of this 2-session qualifying format will actually be like. But yeah, looking forward to watching it play out, and hopefully, like I said, we get some cool storylines. Maybe big names don't make it through, and it gives an opportunity for maybe a surprise pole position here or there in WEC.
Yep, and you've touched on it briefly, but another of the changes for this season, we are back up to 8 races and a few new venues on the calendar starting off. So just to immediately up the challenge, we've got Lusail for a 10-hour race coming up this weekend, and then round 2, Imola for 6 hours. We've also got Interlagos and the Circuit of the Americas back on the calendar after a few years away as well. So plenty of new venues where we haven't seen hypercars racing at before.
Yeah, new venues for hypercar definitely in Qatar and Imola. Or sorry, all four are new for hypercar. You are correct there. But Interlagos and Kota obviously returning to the WEC calendar, which is great to see. I think those are two really cool events. I'm sure you'll agree with me, Ewan. You know, some of my first memories of watching WEC are of the Interlagos rounds. You know, Audi, Toyota, Porsche battling it out there. So it's great to have that venue back and. As well with the Circuit of the Americas. I know obviously Sebring's been the home in the US for WEC, you could say since the start, but I think there's a certain element of stability that maybe COTA provides to the WEC in the kind of North American market that I think would be really good. And also, we've had some good races there, and it was kind of the last race pre-COVID, wasn't it? I think January 2020, and that was a good round. So yeah, looking forward to going back there and seeing what the racing is like. But as you said, kicking off the season with Qatar, I think it's a bigger challenge than people might realise, as we've seen kind of in the prologue and from comments already made by drivers in the first few sessions from running there. And then to go to Imola, you couldn't get a more iconic venue in Italy really than Imola. You know, that is steeped in history. It's mentioned amongst the names of Spa, if you like, and Silverstone and Le Mans. You know, is a true classic venue, and having two big Italian names in the automotive world of Ferrari and Lamborghini racing at home, and then obviously the minnows, the kind of privateer entry, if you like, in Azotta Fascini. I think it's going to be an incredible weekend in Monza, and I hope we get the same tifosi turnout that we've seen for the Grand Prix there in recent years. I think we will, you know, because Ferrari are probably going to be good, and they'll definitely turn the WEC up to win on home soil.
Absolutely. I think Imola, it's the first time, 2011 I think we last saw LMP1 there, the year before the WEC. And also Qatar, Imola, Spa, it's three very different circuits to start the season. So in terms of variety and different teams having advantages in different places, it should keep the thing wide open heading into Le Mans.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well with, you say you couldn't get more different circuits. I mean, we're hearing from drivers at Qatar, which initially looks like quite an open grade one style circuit with plenty of, you know, fast stretches, long wide corners. They're already complaining about struggling with traffic, you know, both the GT3 cars and the hypercar drivers. And then we go to somewhere like Imola, where reality is you've only got a couple of, you know, long enough stretches to really stretch the legs of these cars and maybe make overtakes. So going to see some really quite interesting racing at these venues. And yeah, like you said, factor in that they're new to the teams as a whole. It's going to be some great action, I think, across these new 4 rounds.
Yeah, so we've teased you long enough. I think it's time to move on to our hypercar contenders for the 2024 season. So starting at the top then, looking for their 6th World Championship in a row, Toyota Gazoo Racing, one change in the driver lineup. Nick De Vries coming in place of Jose Maria Lopez in the 7, alongside Mike Conway and Kamui Kobayashi. It's stability in the 8 car as they're going for the 3-peat in the driver's title for Buemi, Hartley and Hirakawa. So a bit of change at Toyota, a couple of changes to the car as well, but a lot of the same at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really served Toyota well, hasn't it? It's been that consistency in the package and in the driver lineups. I am super excited to see De Vries in a top category car. I think as well, one of the key things is Kamui Kobayashi said pre-season that as much as you work to keep the car sharp and keep the car, you know, running at its best and most optimum performance, the same can be said for the drivers. And I think that was quite an interesting point to make, that there might be something that De Vries will bring to the package now and bring to this Toyota championship winning team, all conquering team, that maybe they were starting to lose out on in Lopez. So an interesting shift there, definitely one to watch. And I think on paper, and I'm sure you'd agree with me, if you had to pick a sports car driver lineup and you had Conway, Kobayashi and De Vries on your team, I think he'd be very, very pleased with that driver lineup. And yeah, again, in the number 8, the consistency, the champions going for the 3-peat. I think the Toyota are coming in looking strong as always, really, on paper.
Yeah, I think I mean, we've already said before turning on the camera, we're not going to go bold predictions here. But I think it's fair to say, public perception, Toyota are probably the favourites heading into the 2024 season. Just about. I definitely think the opposition will be closer, but I think, not my opinion, but the opinion of the wider public, the Twitterverse, I think people are leaning towards Toyota. And their closest rivals last year, Ferrari AF Corsa, complete stability for them in the two-car factory lineup, which I imagine will serve them well early on. So in the 50 it will still be Fuoco, Molina and Nielsen, and the 51 the Le Mans winners Giovinazzi, Pierguidi and Collado.
Yeah, again, Ferrari look to be, the best placed contenders to Toyota. I think actually, if you were to look back across 2023, you'd say at Sebring, yes, they were going to have a good time in taking the fight to Toyota, but then, overlook Le Mans and that race where they were the only people to beat Toyota to a race victory, and you look at a race like Fuji, they were really nowhere in comparison to Toyota and even to Porsche. So there's still some limitations, I think, with that car and with that team that I'm sure they would have spent all of the off season getting on top of. But I think they still very much have a point to prove at the front and still need to find a little bit of something, whatever that might be, to get up to Toyota, to be able to be fighting them on a regular basis. We saw it in qualifying quite often. We saw them able to put a one lap down that was close. But then, like I said, races like Fuji, Bahrain even, Toyota really looked again just to be that step ahead of the field, and Ferrari need to close that down and hope that they're able to make that leap. And I think that's got to be shown early on for that program and for the confidence of the drivers, right? And they want to be fighting from the get-go.
Yeah, they've made it clear they want the world title. They ticked off Le Mans last year. Obviously, they want to keep it, but the next step is the World Championship as well. And I think Fuji's a really good one to point out, because that was the only track they hadn't tested at before the race last year. And now we're at 8 venues, and there is a stricter testing limit now they're in their second year in hypercar. They're not going to be able to test ahead of every race. So I think they need to, one of the places they'll need to step up is being on it for free practice 1 when they don't have the experience to work on beforehand.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And I think I'm probably going to cut in with your schedule of how you want to do things here, Ewan. But I think potentially a factor to help them with that is this third car, this AF Corsa, the number 83, this grey area of the privately run entry. But speaking to Antonio Giovinazzi pre-season, he said, I'm looking forward to having a third car because the amount of data we'll get to exchange, the relationship that will have. It's still run by AF Corsa, who of course run the Ferrari factory team. So that third car, that third bullet in the gun is going to be an interesting one to help that, like you say, hit the ground running and just bring in another perspective maybe on such simple things as setup, tyre choice, whatever it might be. So yeah, Ferrari are looking like they're kind of building momentum. They have this feeling to them that they're really going to be pushing for the top spot across this year. Not that they weren't last year. That sounds silly to say, they're not racing to win, but there seems like there's this added strength and kind of real gusto about them this year.
Yep, and that lineup in the 83, Robert Kubica, Robert Schwartzman, Ye Fei, would not look out of place in any factory car in the field. It's the expectations for them are going to be just as high as for the two works cars. So AF course, a lot of options for the 2024 season. So third in the championship last year and top of pre-season testing with slight changes, Porsche Penske Motorsport. I think big expectations for them in year 2 of the programme. I think they'll be the first to admit last year, little bit of a disappointment. One change in the driver lineup, some minor changes to the car, a bit like Toyota on that front, with Matt Campbell joining the 5 crew of Frederick Makovecki and Michael Christensen. And then I know you said last week, I think it was, you think the strongest lineup in sports car racing, Kevin Estre, Andre Lotterer and Lawrence Vanthoor in the 6.
Yeah, I think Porsche Penske, I really hope that they've got something for this year, and I really hope they can be at the sharp end, because it's two of the biggest names in sports car racing, or in motorsport really, in Porsche and in Penske. So the program, like you said, it wasn't an easy 2023. I think they really struggled getting on top of this car in WEC, because we can say that in IMSA they really showed strength towards kind of the middle second half of the year. They were very consistently at the front in North America. So I don't know if I'm just buoyed by the performance in the prologue, but I really feel like Porsche Penske are maybe got something up their sleeves. And the driver change you talk about there, Matt Campbell coming in for Dane Cameron, I think that is a really, really wise decision. I think Dane is a great driver. He's an IMSA champion. He knows how to wheel a prototype, but I don't think he was quite comfortable last year. It really didn't seem like he was able just to put his best performances in the car, and in a world championship, and is something as as pressure filled as this new era we've got. It starts to show, and I think Matt Campbell coming in will be great for him. It's a great opportunity for him to show what he can do on the world championship stage. I mean, again, a fantastic driver. We saw that at Daytona. I don't really know what more I can say about this lineup, Ewan. I think they should, pull out some big results, and I think they're on the verge of that. I think Fuji showed what this team can do. We've seen it in IMSA, what Porsche Penske can do, and I think it's something about trying to implement that level of performance, and whatever it is the IMSA team are able to extract out of the Porsche 963, deploying that in WEC format will be vital for them.
Absolutely, and I think just across last year they were on a huge upward trend. You saw it more on the results side in IMSA, but the performance in WE, things like the gap in qualifying, they were still averaging about 4th, 5th on the grid, but the gap to Toyota had halved throughout the year. Sebring, they were 4 laps down at the end of the race. Bahrain, they finished on the lead lap. And I think Qatar will be a huge test for Porsche, because one of their big challenges last year was tyre wear and keeping the tyres for a stint. Qatar already seems like it is going to be a tyre-dependent race. So if they're able to perform there, there's no reason they can't perform everywhere else on the schedule.
Yeah, I think as well that tyre point, you look at the first race at Sebring last year, and you would see, drivers into their double stint just completely unable to keep the rear end of that car, locked in. Definitely improved towards the latter stages of the year. We got glimpses of what this car and team can do in WEC. We saw that at Le Mans. We saw that both, all 3 cars at Le Mans looked pretty solid. The 75 was kind of spearheading that, but interestingly, again, that was kind of the IMSA crew running that car. So I think there's a point to prove for them, and I think they're going to need to start showing that this year before they start evaluating changes or whatever that might be. But the 963 is a good package. Qatar is going to be tyre sensitive, like you said, and again, a smoother circuit. I think that's another thing the 963 seemed to struggle with at points was ride height and riding kind of more bumpy circuits. Saying that, they did win at Long Beach, which is probably one of the bumpy ones in the IMSA calendar. But I think on the WEC side of things, it'll be a great circuit to get out and hopefully score a strong result to kickstart the season for Porsche Penske.
And also in the Porsche camp, a team which is aiming to cause a bit of an upset this season, I think. Hertz Team Jota topped day 1 of testing with their 2 Porsche 963s. Big change in the driver lineup for them, as well as going up to 2 cars. You've got Callum Ilott, Will Stevens and Norman Nato in the number 12, and in the 38, Phil Hansen, Oliver Rasmussen, and their combined age, he's not going to like me for bringing this up, but is about equal to a 2009 Formula 1 world champion Jenson Button, who 5-year-old me would absolutely love the idea of him being back in the WEC and potentially being able to fight for victories. It's a big Jenson fan back in his Brawn days.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to see Jenson. I think this Hertz Team Jota squad, I think probably the most exciting team in WEC. I think they're, we've seen them almost punching above their weight in 2023. They didn't have the full season as well. They came in late at Spa. They barely turned a wheel with the car. I don't think they had run any testing before Will Stevens got in and did the first lap in FP1 there. And then we fast forward to Le Mans, where their second race with the car, and the FIA is able to dance away from the field in slightly tricky conditions after a safety car restart. Okay, that didn't quite end how we would have liked that stint, but still incredible to show that performance. And then move again forwards to Bahrain and that season finale, where Jota were fighting for the podium spots against Ferrari, and it looked like had the better overall pace. And this is a privateer team. This is not backed by the factory. This is their own entity. It shows the strength that they've got. And I think with two cars, with the drivers you mentioned there, it's great to see Callum Ilott come in. I think that's a really strong signing, as well as Phil Hansen, and we know what he can do in prototype machinery. Bringing them in is going to be a real boost to the team. Not only running two cars and having that second avenue to explore, set up, second avenue as well to gather data and kind of better improve their take on the Porsche 963. And again, you'll agree with me that there's races where they've been showing up the factory team.
Absolutely. There were several times last year where they were ahead of the factory cars. Bahrain, the big example, where they were the ones leading the Porsche line, finishing top Porsche. And I think what's also great about Hertz Jota is they're really the spirit of this whole hypercar regulations. You've got customer team, successful sports car team, the budgets required has gone down, so they've been able to step up to run this manufacturer car on a level playing field, which was really part of the aim of these even right back at the very start. The idea was it'd be mandatory to have the option to provide customer cars. That got dropped somewhere along the way, but it's great to see Porsche are still honouring that one. Glickenhaus had the offer out there. Hopefully a few more will join them in the years to come. But
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree with your point. That's kind of the spirit of this. I mean, if you look at motorsport as a whole, factory teams are actually, the minority. Manufacturers build cars, but it's teams that race them and run them and take them to these incredible races and events. And Jota are really at the top level of that, racing a Porsche prototype at Le Mans and in the World Endurance Championship. I'm super excited by this entry, as I'm sure you can tell you, and I really rate Hertz Team Jota, and I'm super excited to see what they can do this season.
Yeah, and finishing off the Porsche contingent, it is Proton competition with a one-car entry, the 99 of Julian Andlauer, Harry Tinknell and Neil Yarny. Although Tinknell, I imagine, is set to miss a couple of races because when it clashes with IMSA, I would assume that Ford have priority on him for those ones. But they're only 6-hour races, and as we'll get onto with Cadillac, you can do the 6-hour races with just the two drivers.
Yeah, Proton, I don't quite know if the term dark horse is right, but I don't feel like they're quite yet up to speed in WEC. They haven't quite had the same number of rounds as the other teams here. Looking at the other Porsche squads specifically, after Le Mans last year at Monza. Also, as well, I think Proton, I can't remember how many programs they're running you, and I'm sure you can remember that number, but they're involved in practically everything everywhere, it seems. So it wouldn't be a surprise to see this team take a little bit longer to get up to speed in terms of, just being able to focus more time on developing their Porsche 963 and their take on running this car. We talk about how important software is to these race cars now these days, the digital side of development that goes into it alongside just perfecting setup and getting good behind the wheel of the car. So, but Harry Tinknell, Neil Yarny, Julian Andlauer, I think Julian Andlauer is probably the real interesting one to watch there, Ewan, right? This is a big chance for him in a top class team and really a great chance to show the talent I think we all know he has.
Huge opportunity for him, and he was the one who was quickest for them in the test day. It's only testing, but that just proves the levels there for him, and he is hypercar ready. I think the other thing with Proton is they will grow throughout the year, as they have had the least testing of everyone, if I can remember correctly. And also, doing the maths off the top of my head, I think it's 8 cars they are running for the full season this year. No, I've missed the LMP2s out. Wait a second. 11 cars they are
And have you
running
had
for the full
is that
season this
including
year.
the recently announced GT World Challenge Ford as well? Yeah, look, 11 cars. I mean, it's only, I reckon only AF Corsa are a team that could compete with that. So yeah, incredible operation, isn't it, at Proton? But yeah, I think I wouldn't count on seeing them at the sharp end in WEC this year, but I think that, yeah, like you say, they'll build across the season. And I think with a lineup like that, you're going to be getting some great feedback on how to take the car, further up the order.
Also, they're a team who know 24-hour races, so if you want someone who's going to be there at the end at Le Mans, and we saw last year, no one had a perfectly clean run at Le Mans, so just being able to do that, you're probably going to find yourselves at least in the fight for the podium, which is, the aim for everyone here, really, pretty much. Someone who was on that podium last year, Cadillac Racing, who had a year of two halves, great for the first 4 rounds, kind of fell away for the end of the season. They're back with the single car, Earl Bamber and Alex Lynn, just driving as a duo for most races, except the longer ones with Sebastian Bourdais joining them for Qatar, Alex Palou for Le Mans, and potentially someone else for Bahrain, but that hasn't been announced just yet.
Yeah, I think Cadillac Racing are a bit of again, not quite an unknown entity, but as you mentioned there, they started off 2023 really strong and then kind of couldn't keep that performance up in the second half of the year. And I think we're relying somewhat on that podium finish at Le Mans for where they then finished in the championship. I mean, it must be said, they were the best placed car outside of Toyota and Ferrari. They were the top LMDH as a single car team across the season. So not taking anything away from their performance. They've clearly done a very good job with the car, but they're going to look at those results, just glancing at them now from the second half of the season, bottom of the top 10, the 10th, 11th, where from a team run by Chip Ganassi as well, who again is probably one of the biggest sports car organizations and most successful we've seen in kind of the modern era, they're going to want a lot more than what they're currently getting. A bit disappointing not to see this step up to a 2-car thing. There was a lot of talk about that second Cadillac coming in, and we could probably spend a whole hour, Ewan, just talking about the reasons as to why that's not happened. But I think it's a shame to see the number 2 not joined by another Cadillac. But I think that gives them almost a bit of that underdog feeling. And I think Alex Lynn, Earl Bamber and Sebastian Bourdais in this first round will definitely feel like they want to punch above their weight and put a result in. And as we've seen in the prologue, the Cadillac has looked fairly good. Don't want to read too much into testing, as we always have to caveat every point we make about the prologue of pre-season tests. But the car looks good. Everything's looking pretty solid. It's just going to be about unlocking that next step, I think, and to really take them back towards the kind of top 5 and podium positions.
Absolutely. And last year, I think being a 1-car effort was more an issue on the data and setup side. This year, I think it might be the sporting side it costs them more, because the closer Hypercar gets, the more important being able to go for that split strategy under a safety car or anything is going to be. And whereas Jota, Toyota, half the field can go, we're going to go 1 car each way, Cadillac are going to have to hope every time that they are making the right call. So it's a lot of pressure on everyone there, because everything has to go swimmingly, so they don't have that backup. It is worth noting for the Manufacturers' Championship, it's only your top car which scores points. So they've got a slight disadvantage there, but they're not out of it before the season begins.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting point you make there about being able to roll the dice maybe with a second car. You look at, Le Mans gone by in, years gone by in tricky conditions, say like Audi running 3 cars, and they just go, we'll just try the intermediate tyres. We'll just try these tyres on this car because it might be out of the fight. And it's an opportunity to then, grab real-time data and pass it on to the car that might be spearheading the charge. Cadillac would obviously hope that they would have 2 cars up there in the fight, but in a situation where you've only got 1, you don't have that opportunity to lean on that real-time data that you're gathering, and your output is halved, really. So yeah, I think it's going to be a challenge. I think this this year is going to be a real push for this car, this team, considering, as we've said and we'll say a million times throughout 2024, just the level and the number of cars competing in hypercar. But on the other side of the coin, if they can pull out consistent results and the duo at most races can put in some excellent performances, I think that could be a real story for Cadillac this year.
And our final returning team from hypercar last year is Peugeot Total Energies, who have a slight change to the driver lineup with a bit of a rearrangement. The 93 is Verne, Jensen and Müller. The 94 is Stoffel van Dorn stepping up from reserve, De Resta and De Val. So a bit of a change in the driver lineup, but all of them are familiar with the 9X8.
Yeah, I think this is a real big year for Peugeot and for this whole entry, this whole program, and particularly the 9X8. We know that there's this updated version coming potentially for Imola. That seems to be the date that this is happening. And I'm very excited to see what they can do in 2024 as a whole. Flashes of potential in 2023. You've got a taste here and there of what this car, what the team, what these drivers can do. I'm thinking particularly leading at Le Mans, thinking about the podium finish at Monza. Mikkel Jensen passing a Toyota around the outside into the braking for the chicane at turn 1 at Monza. I mean, that would have been a real highlight for Peugeot's year. I think that this program has struggled. I think we both agree that it's not been an easy run for Peugeot, has it? But 2024, if they can make a step forward with this program, and if the kind of revised aero package that we know is coming in, if that can take the car forward, then I don't see why Peugeot couldn't be consistently in the top 10 and in the upper midfield, really.
I agree. I think it's a step they need to make, because being slightly off the pace last year was 8th, 9th, still picking up points. This year, with this expanded field, if you're suddenly 15th and 16th when you're having an off weekend, it's not a good sign for the programme. So hopefully the updated car bring them in line with everyone else, the same tyres as everyone else. Sticking the wing on the back, which will be the big visual change, should make the difference and help them step forward. Moving on to our first new team, unless you had anything else to add on the Peugeot topic.
No, I think the only thing I was going to say was you mentioned about driver change and that swap from Stoffel van Dorn coming in. I think it's going to be interesting because waiting in the wings is probably one of the best young sports car drivers out there, in the market at the moment, in Malte Jakobsen. And I do wonder whether we might see him brought into the seat in 2025. And so I wonder whether the three drivers across the 93 and 94, are starting to feel the pressure maybe that a young gun might be looking for their seat. But yeah, that's my last point on Peugeot, really, Ewan.
And I suppose the option there, because we have the Formula E clash still, where Vernon Van Dorn will be missing.
Bring him in.
Jakobsen might
get
have
him in the seat, Ewan.
Get him in the seat.
I think it would be really good. Throw him in the deep end. Not that it's much of a deep end for Jakobsen, but get him in the hypercar seat for one of those races. I think it would be brilliant to see what he can do. And bear in mind, he's got plenty of mileage testing this car and kind of young driver development side of things. So, yeah, make it happen, Ewan.
Yeah. So, our first new team then of the 4 new manufacturers for hypercar this year, BMW M Team WRT. WRT, last year's LMP2 champions. The BMW, a race-winning car in IMSA, making its WEC debut with a stacked driver lineup of BMW factory talent. We've got Marco Wittmann, Sheldon van der Linde, Raffaele Marciello, Dries van Tor, René Rast and Robin Freitz. So, creme de la creme of BMW.
Yeah, it's all-star lineup, isn't it, really, for BMW? And again, there's so many storylines in this hypercar class. You could almost write down every team as being one to watch. But the BMW team, I think, are going to be a really interesting narrative to 2024's hypercar championship. As you mentioned, the car is a race-winning car in IMSA. It is a package that is definitely in need of some development, and it is definitely maybe not quite up there with the other LMDH cars as consistently, but in WEC in the hands of WRT, who we could argue are probably one of the best sports car teams in the game at the moment. I'm going to be fascinated to see how the two cars get on. And as well, bringing in, Dries Van Toor, I think is an incredible talent and has had, mixed success in prototype, mixed, goes in that. But him in there, Robin Freitz and Rene Rast in the 20 car, I think you couldn't ask for much more. Paired as well with Sheldon Van der Linde, who has experience in this car and more consistent experience with this car in IMSA than his teammates. Fascinated really to see how this gets on, and of course Ewan, Raffaele Marciello in a hypercar. I mean, it's the storyline that was thrown around quite a lot last year. There was a lot of will he, won't he, where's he going, who's got the contract, but can't wait to see that number 15 BMW out there on track and know that it's Lello pedaling inside.
Yeah, I think all you need to know about Lello is, even if you don't know the name, the amount of manufacturers that were in talks with him, rumoured to be linked with him. I think that speaks volumes for himself for just how much talent everyone thinks he has. It was about 5 GT World Challenge poles in a row he managed to get in his match streak at one point. Incredible. Crazy. In a GT3. Going to be great to see what he can do in a prototype.
Yeah, definitely. And I think he will have to make, I would say, a little bit more of a transition than potentially the other drivers in the 6-driver squad. I think he, is going to have to make a bit more of an adaptation maybe than others. But that's kind of one of the beauties about hypercar and about all this new, Le Mans hypercar LMDH regulations that we've got, is they're not quite the out-and-out prototype of the LMP1 cars. They're not the super high downforce, high power, low weight cars that we had before. There's something about them that crosses over quite nicely into GT drivers' kind of wheelhouse, and they're able to get pace out of these cars. And I mean, Raffaele Marciello is overflowing with pace in a GT car. That doesn't need to be emphasized much more. So what can he do in one of these prototypes that maybe might lean more towards his strengths? But yeah, I think as well, another point to throw in here, Ewan, about BMW in WEC is it'll be a different team running it, run by Team RLL in IMSA and now run by WRT in the World Endurance Championship side of things. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see what WRT might be able to extract from this package that maybe it has lacked in the North American side of things. And I think that's quite an interesting little, side by side maybe that will be playing out this season.
Yeah, going to be an interesting comparison to make. And also joining us new with a brand new car, it is Alpine with the A424 Signatech. Still running the car. They've ran the Alpine prototypes for 12 seasons now, I think it's been. It's been quite the run for them. And their 6-driver lineup in the 35, Paul-Loup Chatin, Ferdinand Habsburg, and off the top of my head, why is my
Charles Blazey?
Thank you very much. And in the 36, it is Nicolas Lapierre, Mathieu Vaxivière, and the big talking point, Mick Schumacher making his sports car debut.
Yeah, big year for Alpine here. And it's funny to think they're the first returning hypercar brand, which is quite a strange thing. I think they've already been here, albeit racing the kind of grandfathered LMP1 car, and now they're back with their purpose-built LMDH car. The A424 looks great. It sounds great, but how up there is it going to be in 2024? I think that's definitely a program that's going to build forwards. I don't think they're going to come out the blocks all guns blazing, and I think that there's been a lot from the drivers about that's really the attitude that they're applying to this. Of course they want to fight and they want to push the car and push the other teams and really be in the mix, but ultimately there's a real sense of needing to build this program for kind of more long-term goals. But yeah, the driver lineup's fascinating. You've kind of got this boy band squad of Malaysia, Paul-Loup Chatin and Ferdinand Habsburg, 3 brilliant kind of young prototype drivers. And then you've got kind of the older Alpine hands in Nicolas Lapierre, Mathieu Vaxivière, but then matched with the rookie in Mick Schumacher. And Ewan, what do you think about the driver lineups? Because they're quite an interesting, 6-driver squad, across the 2 cars.
I really like it because they've looked at LMP2. It's a bit like what Jota did last year. They've looked at the LMP2 ranks, gone, here's some proper LMP2 talent, and brought them up to hypercar. And we saw it worked for Jota. Hopefully it will work for Alpine as well. And then Mick Schumacher, bit of a wild card. Expectations vary. Personally, from what we saw from him in Formula 1 and his junior formulas, I think sports cars should suit him, as he always felt like a bit more of a race driver than a qualifying driver. So in F3, when you have half an hour to make up, not much you can do. But here, where someone else can qualify the car and then he can just crack on with his triple stint and get the job done, I think it is much more suited to his skill set.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's going to be an interesting challenge for him learning that, you know, quite selfless attitude that sports car drivers need to have. You know, this thing about you've got to share the car. You can't build the car completely around your needs and wants. You've kind of got to share the load a bit. It's going to be interesting to watch his adaptation to it. But he probably couldn't be paired with a better, you know, more experienced sports car driver than someone like Nicolas Lapierre. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how those two race together this year. And I completely agree with you. It's like they've cherry picked the best P2 drivers and gone, yeah, we'll whack them in the 35 car because Paul-Luc Chatin is rapid and you know, we only, in terms of the World Endurance Championship, we only really get to see him against the LMP2 WEC squads at Le Mans, and he often shows up there and manages to bag pole position or be up there at the sharp end quite consistently. So interesting to see him get on in the top class, you know, with a factory seat there. And of course, Ferdinand Habsburg, Charles Malaysia, two incredible drivers, world champions in LMP2, Le Mans winners as well. So yeah, Alpine are definitely, again, the ones to watch. Klaxon is buzzing really loudly right now, Ewan, but absolutely really, you know, going to be interested to see how Alpine get on and how they build forward across 2024.
Yeah, and then our grid is rounded out by two Italian manufacturers. One, it is fair to say, much bigger name than the other. Lamborghini making their prototype debut as a full factory effort pretty much. They provided engines back in the Group C days, but never done something to the level of this. It's a one-car effort for this season, ran by the Iron Lynx Prema super team kind of group, and it is Mirko Bortolotti, Daniel Kvyat, and again, give me one.
Eduardo Mortara.
I really should have propped an entry list up in front of me. I was so good during the prologue, but for whatever reason, brain's gone today.
It's all good. The amount of names that have been bandied around over the last year about who might get a seat in the Lamborghini squad, don't worry about it. It's completely fine. But yeah, really, the Lamborghini entry really fascinates me because I think people will look at the name and go, Lamborghini, you know, automotive giant, the big kind of, you know, supercar manufacturer, and expect this to be a massive operation behind this. But as you kind of said about the operation with the Iron Lynx Prema super team, you said it, you know, it's a factory team, kind of. Well, it's run by Squadra Corsa, who are like Lamborghini's in-house racing arm. And that is a really quite a small operation in comparison to, you know, Penske running the Porsche operation, you know, compared to AF Corsa running Ferraris. You know, the Squadra Corsa side of things is quite a small development performance arm of Lamborghini. So it's been a real big project to get this car turned around in just over a year, really. Then factor in, you know, they're going to be bringing in Iron Lynx and Prema in running the car. You've got, you know, a big kind of underdog feeling to a brand new car. First time seeing the Ligier chassis and an LMDH as well. It's a bit of an unknown quantity really at Lamborghini, but the driver lineups are strong. You know, I'm sure the team will be throwing absolutely everything at getting there and being in the points. But yeah, you and Lamborghini is kind of don't really know what to expect too much from this entry as a whole.
Yeah, it's one of those which is going to be very hard to place because there's big name above the door, big name behind the wheel, but they are this new effort. They did suffer some delays during the testing of this car, which meant they missed the Rolex 24 for the parallel IMSA program. So I think them, like Alpine and like Isotta, as the new manufacturers, it is going to be about that learning year to start off with. I think for everyone who's new, Le Mans is the target, because you want to be on the pace at Le Mans. You get your 3 build-up races, and then after Le Mans, you can kind of go, by now, we want to be in the fight for consistent points, maybe challenging for a podium or 2. I think that's how most of the newer teams should be looking at this season.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I think Lamborghini will absolutely be like that. They will really be accepting that this year is going to be something about learning and really building this car. And like you said, the delays have been massive to this. You think last year, at least, with all of the LMDH teams across the board, but if you were to take someone like Cadillac, for example, they ran 3 cars at Daytona and had all that information to then apply to the sole car in the WEC when we raced at Sebring. So Lamborghini really coming into this with a lot to learn, and I think, yeah, like you say, there will be a lot of eyes on it because it is a big name above the door, and big names behind the wheel, and Iron Lynx and Prem are big operations that we know about. So there'll be a lot of pressure on that car, but it might not be up there just yet. But fingers crossed that bright green SC63 is in the mix latter stage this year, or potentially early into 2025.
Yeah, and rounding out the hypercar field, it is fair to say the smallest manufacturer on the grid is Isotta Fraschini. I'm still not 100% on the pronunciation, so apologies for that one. Being ran by Duquesne team, who finished on the LMP2 podium at Le Mans last year, with the drivers of Carl Bennett, Antonio Cervelli and Jean-Carl Vernet. So 3 relatively unknown names, 3 names which are new to top class prototype racing, and for them more than ever, I think this is a learning year.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we said, with Glickenhaus and Vanwall to some extent, and the Isotta entry really is amongst those in terms of the size of the operation and maybe ultimately what we can expect. This new entry is really going to have to work hard to be there amongst the big manufacturer names. But it's interesting, some of the names that are involved in this project behind the scenes. The car is built by Michelotto, designed and built by Michelotto, involved in building a number of Ferrari sports cars across the years. You look at the likes of Williams Advanced Engineering, I believe, are involved as well. Bosch are involved in some of the electronics and some of the hybrid systems. It's HWA as well are involved with building the engine. These are some names that have success elsewhere, or just big names really in the motorsports world. But whether that's going to translate to this car, to this project being competitive, I don't quite know. But we all love an underdog, don't we, Ian? We all love this kind of side, the privateer kind of side of World Endurance Championship racing and the hypercar class.
Absolutely, and if you need any proof we love an underdog here, if I just tip my cap slightly, got the Glickenhaus cap on to cover my trim, because
keeping them in the WEC one cap at a time. Yeah,
if absolutely. I bought another 500,000 of these, they might have had the budget to continue for.
No, it's not about. Don't worry, Ian. It's not your bad. Don't worry. It's not on you. That. But,
yeah.
I think I don't know. It's difficult to really know what to expect from Isotta. I think there's a lot of people interested in this car. I think a lot of people are kind of backing it, whether it's kind of because of their presence on social media and they're kind of being quite transparent about building the car and testing and bringing it to races. I think there's a lot of support for them. Or at least it seems like I see that, but whether that's going to unfortunately translate into much, I'm hesitant to commit to seeing this car up the order. And again, if we were to go by anything we've seen in the prologue, it's certainly going to be an uphill climb for that car.
Yep, I think they're missing Glickenhaus and Vanwall on the grid as a kind of level playing field of these smaller manufacturers, because when you've only got the big names for them to go up against, it is going to be a massive uphill struggle. Now, unfortunately, we don't have 2 hours, 3 hours to go through this, and we still have 18 cars to go. So, welcome to the GT3 speedrun round. So, it is Aston Martin with ProDrive, BMW with WRT, Corvette with TF Sport, Ferrari with AF Corsa, Ford with Proton, Lamborghini with Iron Lynx and the Iron Dames, Lexus with Acodis ASP, McLaren with United Autosports, and Porsche with Manthey Racing, each running 2 cars. That's your GT3 grid. What there stands out to you?
I thought you were just going to end it there, Ewan. I thought you were going to go, thanks very much for listening and end it all. But yeah, I think what stands out for me, obviously it'd be silly to ignore WRT. You know, they have, so much success running this M4 GT3 now. I think they're going to be really an impressive squad in the class. Not, before we start looking at the driver lineups, and of course, before we mention Valentino Rossi, being in the WEC this year. I'm fascinated by United running the McLaren. I think that's going to be a really, interesting one to watch play out. And, a lot of talk about whether that's a kind of placeholder for something coming in years to come. Quickly just carrying on, skimming through as quickly as you so brilliantly ran out the whole list. TF Sport and Corvette, I think I can't wait to see the Z06 GT3R, at Le Mans, and of course racing in the WEC. And if we know TF Sport as we do, we know that they're absolutely going to be throwing everything at this on the World Championship stage. And then last but not least, Acodis ASP. It's kind of weird to see an Acodis ASP car and Raffaele Marciello in the same championship, but they're not together. The Lexus RCF in their hands, a kind of unknown quantity, oldest GT3 car on the grid. If there was what felt like a slightly underdog or dark horse team to support, I think it might be them. But yeah, that's my very brief overview, Ewan, and I'm sure you've got much more interesting things to add than that.
I think one of the things really interesting to keep an eye on is we know the bronze driver matters a lot in these Pro-Am classes. But this year, for the first time in several years, we don't have Ben Keating, who has kind of taken that role as the lead bronze. So now that is up for grabs. We've got plenty of new bronze drivers. You've got Sarah Bovey, Ahmed Al-Hati, Thomas Fleur all returning and also going to be trying to vie for that crown. So the whole field has just been opened up a lot for the LMGT3 class, and I think that's what's so exciting. For both classes, the amount of unknown means it is a very open season, and we're not going to find out who exactly is the strongest for a couple of races probably.
Yeah, and I think if there was a time really to get into this, into the World Endurance Championship as a whole, but of course into this kind of new category, you've got to be stuck in from the start because there's great teams, great lineups involved. Interesting what you say about the bronze driver element there. Ben Keating has kind of been that benchmark, and especially last year in the Corvette where they, pretty much dominated the championship. They were, and he was in particular, quite the yardstick for the other bronzes to measure themselves against. Now with him gone, it's quite an interesting way as who's going to take up that baton, but there's kind of this fight amongst them. Like you said, Ahmed Al-Hati was brilliant, in parts last year. I think pole position at Spa looked really strong, or at least was one of the quickest at Spa in qualifying. Drivers like Ryan Hardwick coming in with Proton this year. He is a good, solid sports car driver, and I think has real high expectations of himself and what he can do. Big ambitions in the World Endurance Championship, of course. So excited to see how they get on. But then, drivers like Tom Van Rompuy in the TF Sport Corvette. He's a driver we've seen in P2s and racing quite a lot. So, so many different names in here, Ewan. And can't wait to see things kick off at the weekend.
And however good the bronzes are, I hope at least one time this year for GT, we get a safety car with about 2 hours to go, just as everyone's stuck their pros in, and we can let 18 factory drivers have at it, because the bronze quality is the best amateurs in the world, as a kind of collective. The pro drivers, pretty much all of them have a factory driver or a factory caliber driver in the pro seat, so that is going to be very exciting to see as well. But I think we will round it off here then. We are nearing the hour mark. Thank you very much to Tim for joining me for this one. Being great, running through everything ahead of the 2024 WEC season. All of Tim's links will be in the description, or at least all the ones I remember to put in there. So
Yeah,
and below that there will be my links as well. So if you accidentally click on those ones instead, I'm sure that would be a massive shame.
Very good. No, thank you very much, Ian, for having me onto the podcast. Cool to do something like this, and yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed our run through of the two classes. Albeit we spent a little bit more time on one than the other, but I'm sure we'll get great racing across both in 2024.
Yep, really looking forward to the 2024 season. As Tim said, thank you very much for watching, and we